So, anyways, Nero dies, killed by, well, Galba moves in, you have the Civil War, you have the four emperors, but you have all that nonsense go on. Nero is killed, famously says, "Here an artist dies," I believe. And before that, I believe in Virgil's in the Aeneid, basically, what's he say? Is it so bad to die? Which always makes me think of that poem by Patrick Stewart Shaw, I believe. Well, that's on a total separate matter. We have, so Nero dies. Let's get back to the point. I'm so sorry. I went off on a huge tangent. We have John die in 1215, and that's about the time frame that the Angevin Empire is done. And yeah, that's kind of it. I think you have, unless I should go on. Let's see. Over time, you have who succeeds John? Henry III, I believe, who is interesting. I believe he's kind of religious. Not the greatest king. He, I believe, was influenced by William Marshall, who was, quote unquote, the greatest knight to ever live. He actually served the Angevins from all the way back to the young King Henry, who was the eldest son of Henry II, who died. He served basically a lot of them, all of them. Lasted all the way to Henry III, and he died when he was 9, I believe, and that had an influence on him, and he tried not to be another John. And you have, in time of Henry III, Simon de Montfort and all that nonsense, and he gets tore up and his legs shipped across the country and his arms in pieces. But that's a different matter. And you have Edward I and the conflict in Wales, Llewellyn ap Griffith, Llewellyn the Great. Where is that? Gwynedd or whatever. There, I don't know how. I don't remember who. But you have the Wales basically becomes part of England under Edward I, and you have famously like Warwolf, that massive trebuchet that's built and used, and he Edward I is very powerful. But kind of stays home, and then you have Edward II and Isabella of France, the she-wolf. You got Robert the Bruce, and before that, the protector of Scotland. You have William Wallace, and then the Balliols, and the influence Edward I has on England. And then you have Edward II, and you have, who is it? Is it Roger Mortimer that is the lover of Isabel of France, the she-wolf? Anyways, you have a revolt, basically, and Edward II is killed. There's a source, I believe, 100 years later, something about a poker and a bum, a hot poker, but it's probably not true. And then you have good old Edward III, who once he's old enough takes the crown, and he has Simon de Montfort killed. Not Simon. Is it Simon? No, it's Roger Mortimer. I think. I don't. Yeah, Roger Mortimer killed. And then his mother's put on house arrest basically for the rest of her life, and he is the one that starts to reclaim parts of France for the Plantagenets. With Edward, you get, and you get his sons, most famously the Black Prince. You have Lionel of Antwerp. You have John of Gaunt, who are going to be very important going on historically. That's where you eventually get the Lancasters, and the Yorks. But that's another story. That's the War of the Roses. The 100 Years' War. Eventually, you have a French Civil War during that time period, and you get an English Civil War by the end of it. And to be fair, Edward III, that's the Edwardian phase, is part of the 100 Years' War. Crécy, Poitiers, Calais, places, battles like that, sieges like that. They reclaim land, and Edward III had a claim to the throne. I mean, his mother was the daughter? Is it of Philip V? Philip the Fair? And all his sons. There's a whole affair and a conflict within the royal house and the wives of the sons of the King of France, and Isabella the She-Wolf, his daughter, her brothers, she has a negative influence on it, I believe, that because she's kind of gunning for her own offspring to have a claim to the throne, and none of them succeed him. I mean, sorry, Philip. None of his sons succeed, and Edward III actually has a claim. And it's really quite interesting going forward. But I mean, I believe that's the end of the Capetians, right? I mean, you have really, well, no, it's not the end of the Capetians, to be fair. You have, that's totally incorrect. You don't get, the Capetians don't fall until, let's see, I believe it's Charles the Fourth. So you have Charles the Fourth, and that's not way after the succession. You have Philip the 11th, who's I believe, first of the Valois. you know, and when King Charles, I believe the ninth, died, the nearest male relative was his nephew, Edward III. But I believe there's this whole dispute with, Saliclaw, Frankish Saliclaw, and you have Philip of Valois is preferred, and he's the cousin of Charles, not the nephew by Isabella of France. And she kind of helped with her son's claim. But anyways, you have totally a legitimate claim, by Edward III, and some of it was acknowledged even, but that doesn't happen. So in 1327, that is when Edward begins his reign, and he dies in 1377. But when you get to the battles of, the second phase of the Hundred Years' War, which began in 1369, but he declared himself the rightful heir to the French throne. And the Hundred Years' War basically began with him 1337. It went exceptionally well, I believe, according to Wikipedia, but they're not wrong. And they, had the famous victories at Crécy, like I was saying earlier, in 1346. And you can see here the success first, at Calais, and then by 1357 they have a big chunk. They got Brittany, and it would be Aquitaine expanded, and went quite well for them. And the second phase, called the Caroline War, between France and England, was more a French victory. So by 1369, you even have some expansion. By 1369, you have the beginning of the second phase of the French War, and the English gains are almost totally lost. In fact, they now have less than they did when they began. Gascony is increasingly diminished, and they have a little part of Calais, but that doesn't last long. And the war will resume in the third phase of the Hundred Years' War, which is the Lancastrian War, which I'll go into more depth. It's later on, maybe. It is a war between, well, it's started by Henry V, and to get there, you have to go back to Edward III. The Black Prince, his oldest heir, dies, but the Black Prince had a son, and that's who succeeds Edward III. It's Richard II, and Richard II lasts and reigns, I believe, for about a decade, but then he's overthrown by Henry Bolingbroke, Henry IV, who is the first, native English speaker. Before that, they all spoke Norman French as their native tongue, starting from 1066, obviously, till the 1400s. But you have they come from also Edward III. You have John of Gaunt, who's, I believe, the Duke of Lancaster. He succeeds. Well, he's like the third or fourth son of Edward III, brother of the Black Prince of Wales, and his son is who will succeed and overthrow Richard II. So that's where the line comes, Lancastrian, and also the York, which, so in the War of the Roses, you're going to have also they're descended from a brother of the Black Prince and a son of Edward III. But that's a different matter. You get Henry V. Starting his own war, the Lancastrian phase from 1415 to 1453. You have the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. So let's take a look at the map. Let's skip forward a bit. So in 1415, you have the Battle of Agincourt, and you begin to see English gains in France. You see Normandy, Brittany, they get Gascony back, and all the way up to Henry V being named heir to Charles the Ninth. The Mad, I believe. Is he the one that's mad, I believe? Thought he was made out of glass. Was kind of he had some mental health issues, obviously. But anyways, Henry becomes the regent of France, and marries his daughter, actually. His daughter, Charles IX's daughter, who's also named Isabel of Valois. Interestingly enough, she's an interesting character, and sorry, no, we're totally wrong. Sorry. We have, let's see. Yeah, it's Catherine, right? Catherine of Valois. I'm so sorry. Catherine of Valois, I'm doing this without looking at anything, kind of going off what I know. It's Catherine of Valois, and I don't know why I forgot that. Queen Consort of England, I believe they're married in 1420, and Henry V dies of dysentery very quickly, but Catherine is pregnant, and that's going to be Henry VI, and he's going to have his own madness. So, obviously it's a matter of biology, and unfortunately, he is going to have his own madness, but he succeeds Henry V. I mean, she's made Catherine Valois the Queen Consort of England for a moment, but let's see. So when Henry V dies is obviously when she is no longer consort. I mean, you get Margaret of Anjou, who marries Henry VI, and let's see. What am I? So, anyways, it's interesting. Catherine of Valois has Henry VI, and Catherine of Valois is a very interesting character. So, Henry VI is not her only child, actually. Funnily enough, there's a Welsh knight, I believe his name's Owen Tudor, i.e. Tudor, if you know, you know. And the Owen Tudor and her have 2 children, I believe Jasmine and Edmund, and Edmund Tudor marries a marvelous woman, very young, Margaret of Beaufort, and she has a child, and she's an interesting character. She's definitely something I would like to go into more depth with. She politics and plays her way around to get her son's lands back, to have influence, and eventually make her son king. Her son is named Henry, and he's actually born in, well, I don't remember where he's born, probably in France, but he's in exile with his uncle Jasper in France, but sorry, I kind of jumped forward. Going back to Henry VI, Catherine Valois, just remember her. She has children outside of Henry VI, outside of with Henry V, and those children will be important. Well, that child, her grandchild, will be very important. But anyways, going back to Henry VI, Henry VI loses all the lands. You have John of Gaunt, Lionel of Antwerp, and their occupation in France, but they lose that, and it kind of is what it is. But Henry the Sixth loses lands, and then he loses, kind of influence. He's kind of crazy, and you have, the Duke of York, who has major influence, and there's a battle going on between the Lancastrians and Catherine of Valois against, against against the Duke of York and the Yorks, and eventually, you get Edward the Fourth of the House of York, who will succeed Henry the Sixth. But you have this is the War of the Roses. You have Henry the Fourth. By 1442, he is King of England, and he is an interesting character. I always kind of liked him. Pragmatic. He's king. He has two reigns, famously. He realizes he's going to lose and goes into, retreat, a smart retreat, but will regain the throne and will be succeeded. But we'll go into that later if we want to. I don't know. But Edward the Fourth will succeed Henry the Sixth. Initially, against the Lancastrians, you have Edward goes through phases of madness and regains conscious. And the first time the Yorks gain the throne, they leave him alive, and then the second time, not so much. When after the Lancastrians regain it, kind of got to put an end to it, unfortunately. And you have, sadly, we'll go into that later, but you have Edward the Fourth defeats the Lancastrians, and unfortunately, I always found it interesting. Why did Richard, who would be Richard the Third, kill his nephews? I guess he didn't like Elizabeth Woodville. There was something going on there. Maybe I don't know, because he had opportunities to rebel. Their other brother, the other York brother, he rebelled all the time. He had no problem with it. And there were times where it looked like Edward was going to be in trouble anyways. But he stayed loyal, and I believe was named Regent. But he famously took possession of his two nephews quickly, and they died, they disappeared, and that's why Richard III's kind of always famously despised. That's why there's no more monarchs named Richard after Richard III, ironically, of course. And rightly so. I mean, disloyal, that's terrible. I mean, even at the time. But, I don't know if history in its time and place, but it happened, and happened enough for us to know about it. But anyways, you have so Richard III succeeds. His brother Edward IV and Edward IV's children disappear, and the Woodville, Elizabeth Wood, the only child alive is a girl, the daughter of Edward IV. But in the end, Richard III, funnily enough, going back to the Tudors, Henry VII inherits the Lancastrian claim, basically. And he's who will succeed Richard III. In fact, Richard III will die in battle, famously. and Henry Tudor becomes king, Henry VII. And we kind of talked about it earlier. Henry VII's mother is Margaret Beaufort, who we'll talk about this in more in depth, but the Stanleys who engaged at the famous last battle. I don't know if it's Bosworth or Field or that's one of them. I'm not. I'll have to look through some of my books and re-educate myself. Just going off the top of my head, like I've said, you have what's called the Tudor dynasty begins with Henry VII. Henry VII's mother is Margaret Beaufort, but his father was Edmund Tudor. Funnily enough, that goes back to Catherine of Valois, who is the mother of Henry VI, but overthrown by the Yorks, Edward IV, which is so it's interesting because both of them are descended from Catherine of Valois. Interestingly enough, who's the mother? No, sorry, the sorry. Catherine is Catherine of Valois. Catherine of Valois was the wife of Henry V, right? Yeah, and the mother of Henry VI. And so it goes back to that. She's also the mother of Edmund Tudor and Jasper Tudor, like I said before. And they are given lands because Edward VI, they're Edward VI half brothers. And one's the Duke of Richmond and one's the Duke of Bedford. And Edmund marries Margaret of Beaufort, who's a mover and a shaker. And Edmund dies before Henry is born, but his mother, Margaret, who's very young when he's born, has him. But her claim, interestingly enough, is also going back all the way to John of Gaunt, like I said. And John of Gaunt was the son of Edward III. He's an interesting character, and Gaunt is a corruption of Ghent. He was born in would be Belgium now, I believe. Anyways, Margaret is very influential. She has a matrimony. Sorry, what is that word I'm looking for? The maternal succession of the Lancastrian claim, kind of, from John of Gaunt. The claims all come from Edward III's children, besides the eldest, which was the Black Prince, whose son succeeded and was the Richard II. Anyways, he was overthrown by Henry Bolingbroke, and that's Lancastrians, and they come from also a part. They also come from Edward III. And that would be like, let's see. So you have Henry the Sixth, who's Lancastrian. That's the claim. The Henry the Fourth. And Henry Bolingbroke, like I was saying earlier, first one to natively speak English. He rebelled against Richard II, like I was saying, and his father was John of Gaunt. Like I said, John of Gaunt was very influential, a son of Edward III, and that's where the claims come from. You have multiple children, a lot of children by Edward III. Sorry, not Edward III, John of Gaunt, and you get kings out of that. You get Henry the Fourth, like I was saying, Henry the Fifth, who come from that, and then Henry the Sixth, and then you have the Yorks come out of that, and you get Edward the Fourth, Richard the Third, like I was saying, and then you get Henry the Seventh, the Tudor, and like I was saying, Henry the Seventh, basically, the start of the Tudors. He was kind of more of like a logistics and economics merchant, economically minded type, not less a militarist kind of statesman. He kind of just sat back, like, to win his crown, let his generals and his knights do what they needed to do. And his mom kind of tipped the balance. She had married from the House of Stanley, and they famously were kind of waiting to see who would win, and they eventually ended up going up on to Henry VII's side. And that's kind of how the Tudors got there. But the Tudors kind of inherited the Lancastrian claim, but the Lancastrian and Yorks all come from Edward III, come from John of Gaunt, and it's really interesting. There's a lot of interesting parts about that. And Catherine of Valois is, interestingly, the mother of Henry VI. And sorry, I forgot what I was saying even. But let's see. Yeah. Yeah. So Catherine of Valois is the mother of Henry VI, from Henry V, and the great grandmother of let's see. Yeah, grandmother of Henry VII. That's correct. Kind of interesting. So the Lancastrians ended with Henry VI. Catherine Valois was the mother of Henry VI. They're overthrown. They're succeeded by the Yorks, Edward IV and Edward III, and I think technically, like, they have Edward V, but he didn't last long, like we said. And then the kind of the inheritor of the Lancastrian cause is Henry VII, Henry Tudor, and he's descended from, through his mother's side, Edward III, or John of Gaunt, and also descended and the grandchild of Catherine of Valois. Interestingly enough, so if Edward VI would have had a son that succeeded him, which he didn't, she would have been the grandmother, but she's the grandmother now, in a different way for a different house. It's just, I find it fascinating, but yeah, that's kind of it. Henry VII wins, and he marries, actually, I believe, Margaret of Anjou, who is, actually, I don't know. Let's see. Let me think. Yeah. So I looked it up. Lady Mark. No, that's not right. This is Elizabeth of York, who is going to be the daughter of the Edward IV. So she kind of reunited. Henry Tudor kind of unites the York and Lancastrian causes back, and unifies them. And the child of, their child, Henry VIII, is going to be, the successor, and they call it the Tudors, because they're descended from, Owen and Jasper Tudor, who are middle type Welsh knights who one of them ends up having and marrying the wife of Henry V and having a couple kids with her, and their grandchild would be Henry VII. And that's kind of where I'll end it right now.